نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا وشفيعنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أما بعد فإن خير الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل بدعة ضلالة رواه مسلم وفي رواية النسائي وكل ضلالة في النار وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام ما أحدث قوم بدعة إلا رفع مثلها من السنة فتمسكم بسنة خير من إحداث بدعة رواه أحمد وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إذا مات الإنسان انقطع عنه عمله إلا من ثلاثة إلا من صدقة جارية أو علم ينتفع به أو ولد صالح يدعو له رواه مسلم. Just to continue with the discussion that took place last week, in the last Jumu'ah, on the topic of how we can benefit our deceased, those who have passed away, after they have departed from this dunya. What can we, the ones who survived them, do for them in order to benefit them? And I mentioned to you the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, reported by Imam Muslim rahimahullah ta'ala, in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that when a person dies, إِذَا مَاتَ الْإِنسَانُ انْقَطَعَ عَنْهُ عَمَلُهُ, when a person dies, then his amal, his good deeds are interrupted, they are seized, they come to an end. إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثَةٍ, except for three things. إِلَّا مِنْ صَدَقَةٍ جَارِيَةٍ, a continuous sadaqah, a continuous form of charity, أَوْ عِلْمٍ يُنْتَفَعُ بِهِ, or knowledge that is beneficial, أَوْ وَلَدٍ صَالِحٍ يَدْعُو لَهُ, or a pious, righteous child who does dua for him. These are the three avenues in which a person, even after departing from this dunya, is able to benefit in the hereafter. Apart from these avenues, all other avenues are closed. They come to an end. So a person is able to accrue thawab, rewards with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to benefit themselves in the hereafter until their last breath, for as long as they are living. As soon as they have departed from this dunya, as soon as their soul departs their body, and they enter the realm of the hereafter, they enter the realm of the barzakh, and then from there they move on to the akhirah, the yawm al-qiyamah, the day of judgment and beyond. They are no longer able to continue doing any good deeds, carrying out any good deeds, any acts of righteousness. But these are the three avenues, the three channels through which that person can still continue to benefit. Now, Mullah Ali al-Qari rahimahullah ta'ala, in his commentary of this hadith, has mentioned that the reason for these three avenues continuing, the reason why a person is able to continue to benefit from thawab, from rewards, neki, despite departing from this dunya, is because of what we know from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself, that when a person becomes the means of a good that continues, when a person becomes the means of a goodness, a good, a khair that continues, then either that person is a direct doer of that good, the person directly does that good, or that person becomes a means of that good happening, then we know from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself and from His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that that person shall continue to benefit. So the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentions 3 deeds. He says the first one the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentions in the hadith is sadaqah jariyah, a continuous sadaqah, jari sadaqah, a sadaqah that continues. Now sadaqat, or acts of charity, as I mentioned previously, in Islam, sadaqah does not just mean giving money, giving wealth. Sadaqah can be in the form of many things. Like I mentioned to you, saying a kalima tayyiba, saying a nice word, a kind word to a person is an act of sadaqah. Meeting a person with a happy, joyful, pleasant countenance, with a smiley face. وَتَبَسُّمُكَ فِي وَجْهِ أَخِيكَ, and you're smiling in the face of your brother Muslim. When you meet a person with a nice smiley face, despite all the hardship that you're going through and the tough times that you're going through, the stress and anxiety and so on that you're going through, the depression you're going through, when you meet a person, you smile at them. Then that's an act of charity, that's an act of sadaqah. So sadaqah in Islam is very broad. The definition of sadaqah is very broad. Sadaqah does not just mean charity, as we understand in English, which means to give money or to give a form of wealth, mal. Sadaqah can be many things. But there's one form of sadaqah that is continuous, and that is sadaqah jariyah. Jariyah means that jari, that continues. So any sadaqah that is jariyah, that continues, when a person performs that act of sadaqah, then that person shall continue to reap the fruits of that sadaqah for as long as that sadaqah continues to be jari. For as long as that act of sadaqah continues. And the ulama, the commentators of hadith, mention that the best form of sadaqah jariyah is waqf, endowments, which used to be a very popular, common form of good deed that the Muslims used to do during the times when the Muslim Ummah was strong. We had Muslim states, Muslim governments, Muslim societies that were founded on Imani, Islami, Qur'ani, Sunnah values. Then wealthy people used to give waqf, endowments. They used to give away their land or their properties for the benefit of the common people, or for the benefit of a certain category of people, for the benefit of a certain group of people, and so on. They used to give away their land, they used to give away their property, waqf. Waqf lillah. This is waqf for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So people would either live on the land, or they would cultivate the land, or they would benefit from the property, do business in the property, live in the property, and so on. For example, Musafir Khana in the Muslim countries. So the people would either give away land or build a property on the land for travelers. A traveler's lodge, which travelers on the highway, people passing by could spend the night in for free. Or people would dig a well, or a canal, or a shelter for the homeless, or a shelter or lodge for students of the deen, shelters for the poor and destitute, and so on. So these are just some forms of waqf, endowments that the Muslims used to do a lot in the past, centuries ago. And then as the state, the condition of the Muslim Ummah changed, and also corrupt governments came into place, then many of the governments seized all these endowments, as has happened in many Muslim North African countries. People gave away a lot. Wealthy Muslims gave away a lot of their properties as waqf for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that the common people out there could benefit from their land or for their properties that they gave for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But later, when corruption became common in Muslims and Muslim rulers, many of that came to an end. So that is one form of sadaqah jariyah that the ulama mentioned. And likewise, any good that you do that is considered to be an act of virtue, an act of sadaqah, an act of thawab, the benefit of which continues, is also considered to be sadaqah jariyah. Anything that is similar to waqf will be included in this statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that when he said, sadaqatun min sadaqatin jariyah, illa min sadaqatin jariyah. The next thing the Prophet ﷺ, and so even today this is possible. Although it may not be straightforward to give an endowment, a waqf in today's world, but it is still possible, it is possible. People do still give away as waqf their property, so that the Muslims, either the Muslims or humanity at large, can benefit from this. It is still possible, and there are people who do this. For example, something that we can do is when we contribute towards the building of a masjid, or the maintenance of a masjid, or a madrasa, an Islamic madrasa, a Darul Ulum, or a madrasa Islamiyah, we donate whatever we can, then that is also a form of sadaqah. Because the benefit of that masjid, the benefit of that madrasa, for as long as that benefit continues, then we, the people, the donors, those who contributed towards it with our money, with our wealth, we shall continue to benefit from it. And in the form of a masjid, it is obvious that for as long as people pray in the masjid, then I, the one who contributed towards that masjid with my money, I shall get a share of every single person praying in that masjid. Man sanna sunnatan hasanatan falahu ajruha wa ajru man amila biha. The Prophet ﷺ said that whosoever sets a good example, whosoever makes a good way, sanna sunnatan hasanatan, a beautiful way, he is the means of a beautiful thing, a beautiful action, a good action, or sets a good example, then he, falahu ajruha, for him is the reward of that good action, of setting that example, or creating that thing, and then for him is also the reward of all those people who carry out that good action. In other words, if a person sets a good example, and other people follow that example, then that person will get the reward of setting that good example, and also the reward, the thawab of every person who does that good deed, because he showed the way. So anyone who shows a way, man sanna sunnatan hasana, a good way, a way that is good in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an amal that is good in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one that earns thawab, reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that person shall get the reward of doing that, and every other person who follows in his footsteps, and every other person who takes advantage of that opportunity of doing good, then that person shall continue to get the reward of that. In the case of a madrasa, for example, Islamic madrasa, the person should get the reward for as long as the people are benefiting from the madrasa in whatever way, either directly as students in the madrasa, or those who are teaching in the madrasa, they're teaching the deen to the students, they're teaching the Quran and Sunnah and fiqh and so on, then those students will then go and teach other students. So it just multiplies, it keeps multiplying. And that will go on until the Day of Judgment. Even if that madrasa, the actual structure of the madrasa building, is no longer there in the future, say 100, 200, 300 years later, but the benefit is still there, because people studied there, they learned the deen, they learned the Quran, they learned the hadith, and then they taught others, and they would have multiplied by hundreds and thousands of times by that time. So the person who made that contribution to that madrasa, in his grave, in her grave, shall continue to benefit. And this is the second point, the second thing out of the three a'mal that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in the hadith, أَوْ عِلْمٍ يُنْتَفَعُ بِهِ, or ilm, knowledge that is beneficial. Now when a person makes any form of contribution towards knowledge that is beneficial, in any form, and that a person to make a contribution towards knowledge that is beneficial does not necessarily have to be a scholar, an alim themselves. They don't have to be an alim themselves. You and I, who are not ulama, we're not alim, we're not a Mawlana or a sheikh, we can also be part of this by making a mali contribution, a financial contribution towards the learning, the imparting, the dissemination of knowledge of the deen, by making a contribution, a financial contribution. And likewise, and by doing so, we shall continue to reap the fruits of this. أَوْ عِلْمٍ يُنْتَفَعُ بِهِ. And the people who will directly benefit from this are those who shall be imparting that knowledge, either by way of teaching the knowledge, or lecturing on the knowledge, writing on the knowledge, writing books, scribes, and so on. Now the ulama of the commentators of hadith mentioned, Ibn al-Malak rahimahullah ta'ala says that the reason why the Prophet ﷺ said, أَوْ عِلْمٍ يُنْتَفَعُ بِهِ, knowledge that is beneficial, is because it has got to be beneficial. If the knowledge is not beneficial, then the person who is the source of this knowledge will not get any reward for it, if the knowledge is not beneficial. And by this is meant, Mullah Ali al-Qari rahimahullah ta'ala says in his commentary of the hadith in Mirqat al-Mafatih, he says that al-ilmu billahi wa sifatihi wa af'alihi wa malaikatihi. What is beneficial knowledge? Beneficial knowledge is intended knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowledge about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his sifat, the actions, the doings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also included in this is ilmul kalam or ilmul aqaid, a creedal system, belief system, and also the books of knowledge, tafsir, and the books of the sharia of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the books of hadith, the books of fiqh, and the books of usul al-fiqh, the principles of fiqh, and so on. All of this is included in ilmin yuntafa'u bihi, because this is beneficial knowledge. When we make a contribution towards this beneficial knowledge, either the coming into existence of this beneficial knowledge, or the propagation, the dissemination of this beneficial knowledge, the continuity of this beneficial knowledge, then we shall reap the fruits, we shall continue to get the thawab of this beneficial knowledge even in our graves. So this is the second thing that the Prophet ﷺ mentions in this hadith, that when a person is a matal insan, when insan dies, inqata'a anhu amaluhu, then his amal comes to an end, his amal, his neck amal comes to an end, it is interrupted, it ceases, illa min thalatha, except three things, illa min sadaqatin jariyah, a sadaqah that is continuous, jari sadaqah, or ilmin yuntafa'u bihi, or knowledge that is beneficial. Inshallah, in the next session next week, I shall continue on the final point, which is a waladin salihin yad'u lahu, or a righteous, pious child who does dua for him. After he has departed from this dunya, the Prophet ﷺ said that these are the three avenues through which an insan can continue to benefit, even though he's in his grave, even though he has gone into the akhirah, into the realm of the hereafter, he shall continue to benefit through these three avenues or channels. وصلى الله على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.